G'day guys, I'm your host, 18 time Australian David Serra, and today's discussion is going to be all about how can I brake better in my kart. Now this is a topic that we've received a lot from on our Instagram channels. People asking a lot of questions in regards to braking and how they can maximise that part of their driving. So in today's episode I want to look at 5 different ways you can improve your braking zones to try and find the last couple of tenths and pass your opposition. So the first thing that comes to when it comes to braking is learning how good your brakes work. So we look at different kart brands. They're going to have different braking systems and they're going to perform differently. So if you're jumping in from a CRG to a Tony kart to a Burrell kart, all these different elements are going to come into how the brakes perform, and that could throw you out. So what you want to do is you want to get comfortable with your particular braking system, and the best way to be doing that is to try and use them in a controlled environment first. So what I mean by that is, in the middle of the straights, start to brake a lot earlier, but try and hit them as hard as you possibly can and see how quickly they start to lock up. Also the brake travel that you've got in your brakes. Now some brakes are going to be quite long when you hit the brake pedal before they start to lock up. Other times the brake pedal is going to be a lot shorter as well. So getting familiarised with your braking system is going to help you in the braking zones. Now we know kids especially are going to start going at 90 to, I'm looking at miles per hour, even up to 65, 70 miles per hour when they're on some of these long straights. Now, if they're not comfortable or confident in using the brakes, then they're going to be losing those last couple of tenths in that particular part of the racetrack. So that's why we're trying to get that confidence up. You want to get comfortable where you can hit the brakes nice and aggressively, but short and sharp. If you hold that aggression down, the chances are that the rear of the kart's going to start dancing or sliding around, and you could lose control. So when it comes to your braking zone, you want to hit them aggressively, but as soon as it starts to grab into the brakes start to grab, that's when you want to start to slowly release that brake pedal and regain control. So that's our first tip. Get comfortable with your particular braking system and don't know what other people are using out there. The second part when it comes to our braking zones and trying to maximize our performance in this section of the racetrack is find some markers on the racetrack. So what I mean by this is that each lap when you drive, you've got a certain point that you're going to hit the brake pedal on. If you're just guessing and you're just using, just sort of like, oh, okay, look, I don't really know where I'm braking, well then each lap's going to change. All of a sudden your lap time's going to start to fluctuate, consistency is not there, and when it comes to trying to overtake people, if you don't actually know where you're braking, the chances are you might overshoot the pass or not have the confidence to brake as late as what the other competition is and make the overtake. So when it comes to markers, look for a tree, a painted line on the track, some tyre barriers. You can even break it down to a lot smaller part, but some cracks on the track. So looking for something that tells yourself and your brain that you've got to brake every time on that particular marker. Now the third tip that we're going to look for when it comes to our braking zones is what technique suits your class. So when we're looking at techniques, there's a mini lock technique. And that is when you hit the brakes short and sharp, the brakes start to lock, and then you're releasing it very quickly. There's the trail braking technique where you can start to use the brakes again and holding that brake pressure all the way down into the braking zone towards the apex. And the last one is going to be riding the brakes. So when you've got the accelerator down and you've also got the brake pedal down also as well at the same time. So when it comes to different techniques, there's different classes that one can work better than the other. Now in our slower classes, our lower performance classes being the cadets, maybe in the 4-stroke classes, a mini lock technique is probably going to be best suited because we're not traveling as fast as what an X30 or a KZ shifter kart is, so you don't need to use the brakes for as long. So you got to find what technique works for you on your given track. Now a trail braking technique is when you're holding the brakes down for a lot longer as you're approaching the apex of the corner. Now again, that's suited to our faster classes. So Rotax, X30, our shifter classes, that's something that you might use and feel comfortable with. The last one of riding the brakes, now that's sort of a habit that you don't want to get stuck into because as you go into the braking zone, if you're holding the accelerator down and then trying to slow yourself down with the brakes, it's going to take you a lot longer to slow down. So it's not something that you want to get stuck into. And I did it a lot when I was going from a cadet to a junior kart transition. So again, going from a lower performance class, then stepping up into a high performance category in the junior performance classes. And I'd be like, holy crap, this thing's going so fast for me. So rather than just backing off and hitting the brakes too hard, I'd spin out a few times. So as a safety blanket, I'd actually ride the brakes and the accelerator at the same time. Now, Although this gave me more stability and control, it limited to how late I could actually go into the braking zones. Because again, I've got the accelerator drive me into the corner. That's something we don't want to get stuck into as well. So it was a hard habit for me to get out of. My dad would always be like, mate, can you smell the brakes when you drive? I'm like, yeah, I can smell the brakes. You don't have to smell them. You know, smoke coming off the brakes as you come in. Pads are wearing out a lot faster. So again, you don't want to get stuck into the riding of the brakes, but there's a lot of drivers out there who currently do that as well. Now the fourth part we want to get into our braking zone is getting control. So if we go into the corners and we hit the brakes really hard and we're starting to lose the rear of the cart and it's starting to slide around on us, well again, if we're losing control, that limits the amount of speed that we can go through the corner. So it's about learning how to control the cart, and as you're hitting the brakes hard, learning about how much it's going to react as soon as you hit those brakes quite aggressively. Now again, some of the carts you hit the brakes quite hard and it's going to stay pretty much straight. The Arrow cart, for example, the way that I've always driven is that it hit the brakes and it just dances around me, but I learned to control it. That's now my driving style. So I jump into a Cosmic cart, for example, an OTK cart. Their brakes are a lot different in the feel, and so I hit the brakes the same and it tracks a little bit straighter. So it's adjusting your driving style to suit your brakes. But if you don't have control into those braking zones, well then other people who have more control than you are more likely to be able to brake later and gain those last couple of tenths. So find what works for you. Like I said, you don't have to always be dead straight into the braking zones, but just remember, generally, the more control you have into the braking zones, the more speed you're going to carry through the apex of the corner.